Well, we are on to Scream 3 as we continue to move through the Scream franchise, reviewing each movie in anticipation of Scream 7. Let's talk Scream 3. What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Welcome back into JC's Movies, where you can see all kind of movie and TV show content with me, JC, particularly within the superhero, comedy, and of course the horror genre, as we'll be talking today as we get set to review Scream 3 as we try and make our way through the franchise in the lead up to Scream 7. So if you're a fan of any of those genres, be sure you hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything. Or if you want to catch these Scream reviews in the lead up to 7, and of course we'll be talking a ton about Scream 7 once it's released as well. And we're also dropping movie news here every weekday, Monday through Friday. So if you're a fan of movies, be sure you're subscribed here to the channel. That helps me out. And you can also help out just by hitting that thumbs up button. Help this video hit that YouTube algorithm, find other movie and TV show fans like you and me. With that out of the way, we're going to get set to dive into Scream 3. Obviously, spoilers abound. Once we get into it, we'll run through the plot and talk a little bit about it. But before we do, just kind of initial background here. Scream 3, obviously you get a different writer in here, in Ehren Kruger, who, good writer in his own right, would go on to write, Top Gun Maverick is one that really stands out as a great movie. He's worked on many projects, but personally, I missed Kevin Williamson being around for this one. I mean, I think you feel that when you watch this movie. Not to say that there's not some Scream 3 fans, I'm sure that there are, but for the most part, a lot of people have this towards the bottom of the franchise, and I think that there's reasons for that. They were about to go into filming, and I think it was 3 weeks or 4 weeks before filming started, Columbine happened, and they completely changed the script, changed plans, had to rework everything. As Columbine happened in 99. This movie came out in 2000. Because prior to that, and I think this is kind of the most interesting tidbit to come out of Scream 3 that we've learned since in hindsight, is Kevin Williamson had wrote a treatment, and Stu Macher was going to be running things from prison, orchestrating killings in a high school. And so that obviously had to be changed. They completely went away from any school setting. We were in high school in Scream 1, college in Scream 2. Scream 3, we move on to Hollywood and kind of get a little bit too meta, if you ask me, with that change. But what's interesting is that Scream 3 original idea, Kevin Williamson kind of used it for the TV show The Following, starring Kevin Bacon. If you've never checked that one out, great TV series that he kind of loosely used some of his Scream 3 ideas to develop, a great TV show there in The Following. And so then that left Scream 3 having to head into a different direction. And in my personal opinion, probably some extenuating circumstances causing it, but this is the least scary Scream movie, the movie where it feels more comedic than horror. I think Scream always tends to do a good job of balancing those two. I think here in Scream 3, we lean a little bit much into the comedy, a little bit too far to where it almost feels like a parody of itself at times, in my opinion. That's just kind of how I've always felt about Scream 3. So just kind of a little initial background of why this movie feels different, why Kevin Williamson's not around, and some of the changes that happened heading into Scream 3 that I think was some of the main reasons we ended up with the product that we got here with this one. But with that out of the way, I'm going to get set to dive into spoiler territory. Let's talk about the plot. I'll give some of my feelings on some of the decisions here for Scream 3. All right, so as I said previously, opening, starting us off in Hollywood, obviously, letting us know right from the beginning, we see the Hollywood sign. Oh, this is a completely different setting. We're not in a school. We're not in Woodsboro. Way different feel. You get Cotton Weary back in the opening, Liev Schreiber coming back in this one, and now he is a host of a talk show. He's gotten his, 15 minutes of fame that he wanted from Scream 2, has his own talk show titled 100% Cotton, which I think is pretty funny that is the title. But right here from the opening, he gets a call. We think it's from a woman. Turns out that it's Ghostface. And this is one of the elements of the movie that I've never been a fan of. It's never made sense to me. Now, Ghostface has always had a voice changer, right? I mean, we go back to the original movie at the end, when, Stu pops up, surprise, Sydney, and it changes to the Ghostface voice. But the voice changer was to make, your voice essentially sound like, Roger L. Jackson, the Ghostface voice. There was no magical technology that somehow this voice changer has everyone's voice programmed into it, which is just, a random lady here at the beginning. But then later on in the opening scene, we hear Cotton Weary's voice on it. somehow the voice changer has Sydney's voice later. Pretty much any character that you can think of that's convenient for the plot, somehow Ghostface can sound exactly like their voice, which never made any sense to me. How did he get this technology? How does he have everyone's voice down to the T? Just too many questions right there. It just seems like too much of a plot device than something that actually makes sense logistically to me. And that's always been one of my bigger knocks here on Scream 3. But nonetheless, we go back to Cotton Weary's house where his girlfriend is at the time, and we get one of our first needle drops, which is a Creed what if needle drop. And I unironically am a fan of Creed, always have been. And as always is the case, even in a movie like this, which isn't my favorite in the franchise, the Scream soundtrack still hits. You still get great needle drops, and that's one of the first ones that you get here prior to Cotton Weary and his girlfriend being killed off here in the opening. And I think maybe they were thinking they were giving us a little bit of a shock factor, like, oh, they're not going to expect us to kill off Cotton Weary in the opening. But, I mean, honestly, Cotton Weary wasn't really in Scream 1 besides, a passing mention and a shot on a TV screen, brief cameo in Scream 2, and was there in the third act. But it's not like it's a character that's been around this entire franchise. Like, it could have been the shock factor of if you killed off, Gale or someone of that stature here. So to me, this opening has always been one of the weaker ones in the franchise as well, just in my opinion. So we move on to there. We're introduced to Sydney. We see that she's in a new place, a really remote location. She's got a gate that she can lock. She's got a security system that she's armed, and she's working for a women's crisis counseling center. And we see her, pick up the phone, clock into work as Laura. So not only is she in a remote location, she's using an alias so that, essentially no one can find her. So that's our introduction to Sydney. And then we go to Gale Weathers, who's a guest speaker at a university or something. I think it's a university at this point. And we're introduced to one of the worst hairstyles in cinematic history. I know, I got no room to talk. I'm sitting here looking like Blake from Workaholics, right? But, that's the one thing that always stands out to me is who thought those bangs on Courtney Cox, who's a beautiful lady, was a good decision in Scream 3. Because, man, that's been a sticking point, something that people have pointed out at this movie. And it does, man. It pops right out. One of the first things you see, especially in that first time you're introduced to her, because her hair's put up, and so all you see are these bangs, and you're like, what in the world is going on? But I digress on that. But it's definitely the elephant in the room that you got to mention when you're talking about this movie for sure. But we hear that she is now an anchor woman for Total Entertainment, so she's kind of fulfilled one of those dreams that she talked about having in, the earlier Scream movies. And as she leaves the college, we get an introduction to Detective Mark Kincaid, who shows up at that point, Patrick Dempsey's character, to tell Gale about Cotton's murder, and asks about a photograph that was found on scene, which is a photograph of Maureen Prescott, a young Maureen Prescott, Sydney's mother. So from there, they go to Sunrise Studios, where Stab 3 is being filmed. Cotton had a cameo in that movie. He had been a part of the cast, so that's what leads them down that route. And when they go there, we get Red Right Hand kicking in for the first time in this movie. Always great to hear Red Right Hand pop up in a Scream movie. One of the main things to let you know, hey, I'm watching a Scream movie. I hear Red Right Hand, unless you're maybe watching Dumb and Dumber, where it also pops up, funny enough. And while we're there, we get one of the worst lines of the movie and maybe of the franchise when they ask one of the detectives why, how this relates to, Cotton Weary's death. Why are they on the set? Whatever the question is, but the line just always kills me. He says, he was making a movie called Stab. He was stabbed. Like, what? Who wrote that line of dialogue? I mean, I guess Ehren Kruger wrote that line of dialogue, but, I'm a Kevin Williamson homer. So, I definitely feel the difference here in this script. And like I said, not to say Ehren Kruger hasn't done good stuff before this and didn't do good stuff after this, but just some of the stuff in this script, I'm like, ay, when I watch this movie. And this is one of the ones that I don't return to a ton, just because it's not my favorite in the franchise. I'm going to try not hate on it too much throughout this review, but got to let you know my feelings about the movie. That's what you're here to hear, right? You're here to hear my review. So we move on there, and we get the actors playing the characters that we know from the Scream movies. So, meta on meta, and that's what I talk about, maybe leaning into it just a little bit too much, that we have Gale Weathers, and then we have Parker Posey playing Gale Weathers in the Stab movie. So, we got Parker Posey's character of Jennifer, who's playing Gale Weathers, and we got Courtney Cox, who is Gale Weathers in the movie. And you have that for, multiple characters. There's a Dewey actor, there's a Sydney actor, and so on and so forth as they're making Stab 3 here, which just a little bit too much, a little bit too far, in my opinion. Dewey is dating the character that's playing Gail in the movie, Parker Posey's character of Jennifer, as we get introduced to David Arquette, who is now back, and he is actually serving as a consultant and advisor on the Stab 3 movie. And then right away, we get kind of that different feel. And this is what I'm talking about this movie feeling like a little bit of a parody of itself. Is there at the movie studio, we get a Jay and Silent Bob cameo, which, hey, I'm the biggest Kevin Smith fan you'll meet, maybe. I love Kevin Smith. So that side of me was like, awesome, Jay and Silent Bob in the movie. But it feels so out of place also. It's just a one-off. It's a non sequitur to make a Gail Weathers, Connie Chung joke. And it just makes and adds to the aspect of this film that feels far less serious than the first two. Right there is what I'm talking about leaning into the comedy and maybe even feeling like a little bit of a parody of itself. And to continue on with that theme, there's not a ton of scary scenes in Scream 3, in my opinion, but some of the more scary moments, I thought, or the more creepy moments, come from Sydney's dream sequences, her hallucinations, if you will. One of the first ones that we get is, she's asleep on the couch and she sees her mother pop up in the window and she's blaming her, saying everything she touches dies, and you got the bloody hands on the window, and then you get a ghost face jump scare before Sydney wakes up. So I think some of the scarier and more creepy scenes in Scream 3 are those moments where Sid's hallucinating Maureen Prescott. That's really some of the better moments as far as scares go in the movie, because those are few and far between in Scream 3, in my opinion. But one thing you do get, a good side of in Scream 3 is cameos. So we mentioned Jay and Silent Bob, but, there's a lot of different roles to be filled with Stab 3 going on. And, you get Parker Posey in this movie. You get Patrick Warburton, and then you even get like a horror legend like Lance Henriksen, who's here as John Milton, the head of the studio, from Pumpkinhead fame, many other movies that you can name there. We're introduced to him as the producer, and then we're introduced to Scott Foley, who plays the film's director, Roman Bridger, which I think is funny because that's kind of a Kevin Williamson connection, because Scott Foley was, president in season 1 of Dawson's Creek. You get Jenny McCarthy in here as well, very briefly, but she is in here, and her death scene comes with yet another fake Ghostface voice changer as he pretends to be Scott Foley's character of Roman Bridger, calling her, telling her about a rewrite, and then Ghostface pops out and kind of dispatches of her pretty quickly, kind of introduced to her and then dispatched of her all in one scene. And I think if you go watch, her death scene, that kind of just hammers home what I'm talking about this movie being more comedic than scary, because not a great chase scene. And then kind of the button on the scene is that she's in a movie set picking up knives that are rubber knives and picking up a machete and trying to kill Ghostface with a rubber machete. And it's like, this isn't, this feels like a parody when in those moments right there. It feels way too much like, I know that there were extenuating circumstances, but they just leaned far too much the other way with this movie, in my opinion. And that scene is one that, really, I think where it stands out a lot. We find out in Dewey and Gail's scene after this, they're eating at a restaurant and they got a little scene where I guess we get to see them reunited, so to speak. And we find out in that scene that Gail left Dewey after she kind of helped him get healed back to health after being stabbed in Scream 2, because she couldn't turn down those opportunities that she had in LA with the talk show and all of that. And she just felt like she couldn't live in Woodsboro. She, felt too small for her. She felt too big for Woodsboro, I guess you could say. And during that conversation, Dewey informs her that he thinks someone working on the film is trying to find Sydney because someone had called saying they were from the studio requesting info on her in the past. And then once production started, not long thereafter, someone broke into the set, going through the files, looking for the file on Sydney Prescott, but Dewey had already removed it at that time. So whoever it is wasn't able to get it because Dewey had taken it and hidden it. Another smart Dewey moment. And you get those, man. You get those smart Dewey moments every now and then through the franchise, and I love those. And so after Sarah's death, which is the Jenny McCarthy character that we were talking about there, Parker Posey's character of Jennifer and Dewey realized that the killer is offing people in the order in which they die in the Stab 3 script, which is, interesting. That's a little bit of a nice touch there, I think, maybe, because Cotton died first, then Sarah died, and that's kind of the order that they died in the movie. But they say the next to die in the script is Gail Weathers' character, so that's why, Parker Posey's character of Jennifer is worried but there are multiple different versions of the script, which I think this is another meta point here. As I say, the producers have 3 different versions of the script to try to keep it from leaking on the internet who the killers would be, which is exactly what happened with Scream 2, and they did have to change the script. So is that a reference to, real life right there? Is that super meta? Could be, but they don't know which version of the script that the killer has, so they really don't know who's next in line. They're assuming maybe Parker Posey's character of Jennifer, because that's, the most recent script that they have. But really, this kind of leans into what I'm talking about this one being a little bit too meta at times, in my opinion. And then we're introduced to Patrick Warburton's character of Stephen Stone, often referred to as just Stone. He is Jennifer's bodyguard, the Parker Posey character. And I do like that he calls Dewey Dewdrop in the movie. I think that's a nice bit of comedy. And not to say that the comedy bits in this movie aren't funny. They are. You do get some good laughs in this movie. But, I'm sitting there, I'm like, isn't this supposed to be a horror movie? I feel like I'm watching... It almost lines up more with the Scary Movie franchise than the Scream franchise at time here for Scream 3. But from there, we cut back to Sydney, aka Laura. Her secret identity is when she works at her job there at the crisis center, and she takes a call from someone on the crisis center. It's a female voice, and then all of a sudden the voice changes to Maureen Prescott's voice. Now, already, like I said, it's far-fetched enough that Ghostface has any character's voice. How in the hell would he have Maureen Prescott's voice on this voice changer? It makes no sense at all. There's no way that he would have that voice. So, it's just like those moments really take you out of it. It's just not very believable, in my opinion. At this point, we know Ghostface knows, whoever Ghostface is, knows Sydney's secret identity of Laura. She's probably not going to stick around in her remote house anymore. Gail tells Dewey that she can't find any info on Maureen Prescott at the age she is in the photographs that they keep finding. And Dewey says, well, that's because she lived, in Woodsboro her whole life. But Gail points out that a couple of years before Sydney was born, no one knows where she was during that time. There really is, she just kind of disappeared and no one knows where she went, which all feels very convenient, doesn't it? And it all feels very convenient and a little bit rote that nobody mentioned this prior to Scream 3, that there was a 2-year period where Sydney's mom was just gone prior to Sydney being born. I don't know. It's a little bit contrived to fit this movie's plot, maybe. Anyways, we move on there. Ghostface then calls Stone, the Patrick Warburton character, and he's using Dewey's voice. And then, of course, to fool him, as he has the magical voice changer, which he can be any character that he needs to be to convince whoever. And this is where we get the death scene of Stone. He stumbles into the house where the other actors are, from the Stab 3 movie, plus Dewey and Gale. And so this is, one of the better scenes, I think, in the movie. The one scene that when I think of Scream 3 that I do remember is this scene where they're all at Jennifer's house, the Parker Posey character, and they think that they're getting a call after that, but it's the fax machine ringing. And they run into the fax machine, and the killer's, printing out papers, like script papers of essentially what's happening to them right then. And Dewey's like, this is a trap. We should all go outside. And, one of the scripts had kind of a cliffhanger. It's like the killer will grant mercy to, and that's it. And then you had to wait for another paper to print out. But at this point, Dewey had smartly told everybody, let's go outside. And then one of the other actors says, he can't stand the suspense. He has to know what the killer says. So he runs back in. Overall, it's kind of a corny element, but it works. It works in this scene, in my opinion. So the other actor who was playing Dewey in the film runs inside, reads the most recently printed paper, and what does it say? The killer will grant mercy to whoever smells the gas. And at this point, power's off. So to read the paper, what does he have to do? Flick a lighter, obviously. set up, boom. He's out. The immediately kind of blows up. The house blows up. Big explosion. Everyone ends up kind of their separate ways. And then at this point, Ghostface pops back out. Looks like he's about to take out Gale. Dewey pops up, shoots Ghostface in the chest, mind you. Obviously, probably was wearing a bulletproof vest because goes down to check on Gale. Ghostface is gone. But, conveniently, he left behind another picture right where he got shot at. I don't know. That plot point's kind of weird to me, too. It's like, here, every time I make a kill, here's a picture. Every time I get away, here's a picture of Maureen Prescott. I'm going to drop you guys clues like it's like it's damn breadcrumbs and Hansel and Gretel or some shit. But accompanied with this picture, of course, another picture of Maureen Prescott. They flip it over, and on the back it says, "I killed her." And so now, this Ghostface is taking responsibility for the murder of Maureen Prescott as well, kind of, going back and changing some things that we learned of in that first movie, which is another kind of thing that dampened Scream 3 for me. Don't go back and try and change something about a perfect movie, about Scream 1. Anyway, we'll get there. We'll get there when we get to the third act. But after that, we're back at the police station, and the detective Kincaid tells, Dewey he needs to talk to Sydney because all of these are photographs of her mother. And so Dewey's going to try and call Sydney. He calls her. While he's on the phone, we see in the background, she's already there at the police station. As expected, when she got that call from Ghostface, she wasn't going to stick around in that house any longer. She heads here and shows up back at the police station. They take her to the Stab 3 set because that's where, all the pictures that they've found of Maureen Prescott, they were all taken on a movie set. So that's why they take her there. And when they arrive there, popping out of one of the, actor trailers or whatever is a new character, and it's Martha Meeks, Randy Meeks' sister. First time we see her in the franchise. She pops up there saying there's something that they should see, and she plays a VHS. Yes, I miss VHSs. I got my VHS stand right here in the background with some of my favorites. I've got totes full of VHSs, but that's a whole nother issue. Just talking about my love of physical media. But it's a VHS tape of Randy, and I'm like, yes, we get Jamie Kennedy in here a little bit, because that's another thing with this Scream 3 script, that makes this movie feel a little bit different. You don't have Randy, as he was killed off in Scream 2. Neve Campbell had a lot going on with other projects, so her screen time is less. So up to this point, it's really been Gail, Dewey, and some of the new characters that have carried this film up to this point. So it was nice to get, Sydney popping up, and then really nice to see Randy pop back in, as he had pre-recorded a video in the event of his death. So, he pretty much tells them, if you're watching this, that means I didn't survive, but he wants to help them so that he didn't die in vain. And he tells them that they are dealing with the concluding chapter of a trilogy, which there's just some more meta right there, and explains the quote-unquote trilogy rules, which basically saying anyone, including the main character, can die, which I do like that touch of putting that into the script so that, the first time you're watching this movie, you feel a little bit on edge. You don't feel like Sidney Prescott is safe. You feel like, oh, okay, this could go anyway. Randy said so, and his rules are usually correct. So I do like that touch. And then he also says that the past will come back to bite you in the ass, which we will find out a little bit more of in the third act. Continuing with the cameo fest here in Scream 3, we get a Carrie Fisher cameo, and she makes the joke that she was this close to getting the role of Princess Leia. Yet again, I mean, it's just a throwaway line, and kind of a throwaway cameo, similar to the Jay and Silent Bob one. Is it funny? Sure, but it's supposed to be a horror movie yet again, I say. But I digress. From there, and from her, they find out while looking through some files there that she grants them access to after they bribe her, that Maureen Prescott was an actor and starred in some horror movies, and all 3 horror movies that she starred in were produced by who? John Milton, the producer of Stab 3, the Lance Henriksen character here in this movie, which kind of makes you start to question him, which is good that we're starting to point fingers at people, because this movie doesn't set up a ton of red herrings and doesn't do the best job when it tries to, which we get an example of in one of the next scenes where Sydney's in the bathroom and they try and set up a red herring when Sydney finds the actress that's playing her in the movie hiding in one of the stalls with the ghost face mask and the robe and a cell phone, kind of trying to harken us back to, when Billy had the cell phone and she suspected him and all of that in the first movie. So trying to set up a red herring here, but not the best job of it, in my opinion. Anyways, from there, Sydney wanders onto the set, and she finds the set that's recreating her bedroom. And when we go in there, hey, how about another cameo? This time it's a Creed poster on the wall of the set in her bedroom. I'm all for the Creed love that's present in this movie. That is a plus from me. And we get her reminiscing on some dialogue from a better movie, from the original Scream, as she's kind of reciting lines that we heard her and Billy say in, one of those early scenes in the original Scream movie. And of course, Ghostface pops up in the window of the set and attacks her and begin a chase around the set, which this is one of the better chase scenes in the movie because we're running through, different familiar places that we've seen before. Stu's house is there as a set, her house is there as a set, and ultimately she ends up in the room where they're going to recreate Maureen Prescott's death scene. And at that point, when she gets into that room, she hears her mother's voice and then starts hallucinating a body bag with her mother in it coming after and chasing her. And this is one of the plot points that I don't think they did the best job of selling to us, because this happens a couple of times through the movie, and I don't think it's ever really clear, was that Ghostface who took the time to get into this body bag and try and trick her? Was she, is she experiencing PTSD from what's happened to her in her life and she's hallucinating her mother, and that never really happened, and that body bag never chased her to where she jumped out of a window of the set? I don't know. I don't think the movie does a great job of telling us either way. Maybe they want it to be ambiguous, but it's just a plot point that always kind of bumped me here in Scream 3 as well. But obviously, Sidney emerges okay. Ghostface is gone. The detectives go up and check the sets. They don't find anyone. And from there, we get Jennifer, the Parker Posey character, Dewey, and Gail going to question John Milton about the info that they found out about Rena Reynolds, which Rena Reynolds was the name that Maureen Prescott used as an actress in the horror movies that she did working for John Milton. They question, why would he produce the Stab movies, knowing that they originated from Maureen Prescott's murder, someone that he knew in real life. And, he claims the studio came to him with the Stab movies. And once he realized they were based on, Maureen Prescott, and that was someone that he knew, realized, Maureen was Rena Reynolds, he felt at that point it was too far gone and he couldn't say anything because he feared then they would think of him as maybe a suspect in her murder. Gail presses him further about what happened with Rena Reynolds, and he goes on to talk about the parties that he had back in the 70s, saying, the 70s was a different time. And, he hosted parties where women could come meet men that could help them get parts. And he claimed that, Rena Reynolds knew what these parties were when she decided to attend. But apparently, what we ultimately learn is, this movie does take a little bit of a dark turn here, is that she was assaulted at, one of these parties by maybe a group of men. It's never really told exactly, but we know it was, nothing good came out of it. That's for sure. As I said, it goes a little bit dark in there, with some of the backstory that we find out about Rena Reynolds. Sidney asks Detective Kincaid what he knows about trilogies back at the police station. He says that in the third one, all bets are off, and then goes on to talk about how he grew up in this area, I guess, in Hollywood, and knows his way around the sets, which is, I guess, the movie's given us another attempt at potentially setting him up as a red herring. From there, we see Dewey, Gail, and Jennifer in the car. They get a call from Sidney telling them to go to John Milton's house, where the director of Stab 3, Roman Bridger, is having a birthday party, and that's taking place there. So Dewey, Gail, and Jennifer head to that house, which will be our third act location. Of course, we come to find out was not Sidney. It was Ghostface's magical voice changer that had Sidney's voice on it. So we get to this house, which will be the third act location. Everyone kind of splits up at the house once they realize that it wasn't Sidney. I think that Gail and Dewey find the voice changer, actually, which magically has their voices and, other characters' voices. And that's when they realize the call didn't come from Sidney. Gail then finds Roman in a deep freezer, the director of Stab 3, the character played by Scott Foley, seemingly dead. She even checks his pulse, and Jennifer's character, Parker Posey, pops out, says, "Is he dead?" She says, "Yes." Mad scramble, because they know Ghostface is in the house at this point. They've found him dead. And so the actress playing Sidney is the next death that we get. She runs off by herself. She's killed by Ghostface. We get some line about her saying, "I didn't sleep with that pig, John Milton, to get this role just to die here." So giving us a little bit more insight into, John Milton's shady character, his shady background. But the actress that then plays Sidney in the movie is killed off in that scene. And then also, kind of the Randy stand-in in the movie, a character named Tyson, is stabbed and killed by Ghostface as well. And that leaves us with only Jennifer, Dewey, and Gail left here at the house. And we do get a cool scene where Jennifer kind of finds her way into, a weird kind of secret room that's like a two-way mirror. And she's trying to holler at, Gail and Dewey, but it's soundproof. They can't hear her, but they do start to see the mirror shaking. So Dewey starts shooting out different glass panels in the mirror, trying to save her, but he's too late. She's been stabbed. She falls through the mirror and she's gone. So Gail and Dewey, it's all we're left with here at this point. And after another chase ensues, Ghostface grabs Gail. They tumble down some steps into a basement area where Ghostface is left unconscious at the bottom of the step. But Gail's, obviously scared to try and step over him despite him being unconscious. So, kind of calls Dewey on a cell phone, tells her where he is. And Dewey comes, he opens the door to the basement. And right at that time, Ghostface awakens. He throws his knife at Dewey. And just luckily for Dewey, it's not the knife end, but the handle end that hits Dewey in the forehead does knock him out. And he comes tumbling down the steps as well. So at this point, we know Ghostface is there, hovering above both Gail and Dewey. And Dewey, of course, is knocked out at this point as the scene kind of cuts away. And we get Sydney receiving the call from Ghostface, telling her, he'll kill Dewey and Gail if she doesn't come to the house, and asks her if she wants to know who killed her mother. And that's basically one of the main ways that she lures Sydney to this house, to John Milton's house here in the third act. And when she gets there, of course, Gail and Dewey are tied up. Sydney and Ghostface end up going at it. They end up in a secret room downstairs with Dewey and Gail tied up. Detective Kincaid has showed up as well. He's been knocked out. So it's Sydney and Ghostface in a secret basement room alone. Gail and Dewey upstairs and Detective Kincaid upstairs incapacitated. So at this point, it's like it's all on Sydney. She's going to have to take on Ghostface again herself. They get into this basement, and this is where we get the monologue from Ghostface, and we get our reveal. And I don't know. I mean, I like the monologue. I like the performance. But like I said earlier, to me, it just kind of, like, why would you go back and change something from Scream 1? Or try to change something from Scream 1 that, I don't know, it's a mistake, in my opinion. But it's also pretty unpredictable yet again, because much like we talked about in the Scream 2 reveal, even if you guess who the killer is, you don't guess the twist because you don't know exactly who they are, which is what happens here with this one, because Ghostface delivers a monologue, begins talking about Rena Reynolds, saying she was his mother and that he searched for her and he found her. So he came to Woodsboro and, knocked on her door, and she slammed the door in his face, saying that she had a new name, Maureen Prescott, and claimed Rena was dead. So she didn't want anything to do with him. And then Ghostface removes his mask, and it's revealed to be who? Roman Bridger, the director of Stab 3, Sydney's half-brother, I guess you could say. Anyway, that part's not that bad. What really then, bumps me is that he shows her videos that he had shot after he followed her around, and you see her with Cotton, you see her with Billy Loomis's father at a hotel room, retconning some stuff from Scream 1, and said, all he had to do was show Billy Loomis these movies, and he didn't like seeing his father, with another woman. And so he just had to direct Stu and Billy. And, he didn't do the killings, but he directed them because he's a director. And I don't know, man. I've never been the biggest fan of that. Like I said, good performance by Scott Foley. Not a twist that you can predict. Also, the first and I think only time in the franchise that we only have one Ghostface revealed instead of two, which this movie does have that going for it, but I was never the biggest fan of that. Anyways, from there, he reveals he's got John Milton tied up and tells Sydney, John Milton's the one that ruined her mother's life, plays Sydney's voice on the voice changer, admitting to the murder of John Milton, who he then kills. So his plan is to frame Sydney so he can be the hero, blah, blah, blah. Not the most original plan, but okay. Lengthy fight ensues from there. Roman shoots Sydney twice, playing into the rules, Randy set up earlier that even the main character could die. And he thought maybe Sydney just did because she was shot twice. But Ghostface turns away, looks back. Sydney's body is gone, no longer on the ground. She pops up and stabs him, revealing she was what? Wearing a bulletproof vest, much like Ghostface was earlier. Then she stabs him directly in the heart, and for some reason, grabs his hand, holds his hand as he dies, even though she just found out he was he was her half brother like 5 minutes ago. All of a sudden, she has compassion for him to want to hold his hand as she dies. I mean, I guess he does have a tragic story, but just a weird decision to have them, join hands like they're Arnold and what's in Carl Weathers in the Predator movie. I don't know. It was a weird choice in my opinion. But of course, after he's seemingly dead, Dewey and Gale bust in, and he pops back up for one final scare, as is customary since Randy foretold of it in the original Scream. Dewey's shooting him several times, all in the chest, and Sidney's like, "Shoot him in the head, shoot him in the head," and then finally shoots him in the head. There goes Roman Bridger, who we hardly knew, but is Sid's brother. So, take that for what you will, as Dewey and Gil would come in there, and Dewey ends up with the ultimate kill. From there, we go get our kind of happy ending back at Sidney's remote house. Dewey hands Gil her book, which we know that he wasn't the biggest fan of. We found out of in Scream 2, asking her to sign it. She opens it up. What's inside? An engagement ring. Dewey proposing to Gale, which is funny because at this point, when this movie was made, the two actors were actually married in real life, David Arquette and Courtney Cox. From there, we get Sidney entering the house, much like we saw in the earlier scene. And of course, in the opening, when she entered the house, she closes the door, sets the alarm. This time, she doesn't set the alarm as she did in the beginning of the film. I think she even leaves the door open. There it is. There's your character growth. There's your thematic element right there of Sidney no longer being scared. She can leave the door open. So, happy ending. There's some things about this movie that I like. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, it's entertaining. And as I've said in the past, I don't think there's a bad movie necessarily in the Scream franchise, but this isn't a go-to for me in the franchise by any means. Like I said, it's more comedy than horror. There are decisions that don't make sense to me. There are plot points that don't make sense to me. And I think a lot of that is because they were left scrambling, as we talked about in the opening of this video, with kind of the extenuating circumstances that forced some of the changes to this. All in all, at the end, I think I got to give this one probably a 6 out of 10 at best. I could almost go 5.5, but I'll be optimistic. I'll be generous. Let's go 6 out of 10 for my rating here on Scream 3. A definite drop off from the first two movies, but you can still throw it on, have a good time with it. There's some things that you'll laugh at because the absurdity. There's some things that you'll laugh at because they're good bits. But unfortunately, this is a horror movie, and it doesn't deliver near enough scares, near enough gore. Those moments are few and far between here in Scream 3 for me. So that's why I ultimately land on a 6 out of 10 for this one as we wrap up the spoiler discussion for Scream 3. But I appreciate you guys tuning into this one. We got 3 down, 3 more to go in our Scream franchise review series now as we lead up to the highly anticipated Scream 7. Can't wait for that one. But that's just my opinion on this movie. I'd love to hear yours. Maybe you think I'm wrong. Maybe you love Scream 3. Maybe you rate it a lot higher. If so, let me know why in the comment section. I always enjoy chatting movies with you guys and seeing the way that you guys feel about some of these films as well, because, hey, we all got opinions, don't we? This one's just mine. Like I said, I'd love to hear yours. Those interactions in the comments help me continue to grow the JC's Movies channel. I appreciate that, just like I appreciate you tuning into this one, and I will catch you on the next one.